I was sitting across from the bank official when I realized the door had been locked. Not slammed, not announced, just quietly closed behind him, the click barely audible, but final enough to make my shoulders stiffen. I noticed everything before I understood anything. He didn't meet my eyes right away. His fingers were shaking as he aligned a thin stack of papers on the desk, tapping the edges like he needed the order to hold himself together. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, too loud for a room that small. Then he cleared his throat and said, very carefully, Mrs. Reynolds, if this signature remains valid, you're personally liable for $342,000 that no longer exists. For a moment, the words didn't land. I understood each one individually, but together they felt unreal, like a sentence spoken in a language I almost knew. I stared at the paper he'd slid toward me. My name was there. My handwriting. A date from 2 years ago. I heard myself say, calm and steady, that can't be right. He finally looked up, his face pale, voice dropping even lower. That's what I was hoping you'd say. He turned his monitor slightly, not enough for me to read everything, but enough to see numbers highlighted in red. Withdrawals. Transfers. Accounts I didn't recognize. Then a name I knew too well. My mother-in-law, Carol Reynolds, listed as an authorized financial advisor on a family trust structured in my name, but never under my control. My pulse stayed even, but something inside me went cold. I asked him when the account had been flagged. He hesitated, then answered, this morning. After an internal audit request. I didn't ask who requested it. I already knew. As I walked out of the bank a few minutes later, the winter air felt sharper than usual, like it was trying to wake me up. My phone buzzed with a text from my husband, Mark. Did everything go smooth? I typed back, yes, and slid the phone into my coat pocket. I'd learned early in my marriage that smooth didn't always mean safe. When I first met Mark, he'd seemed like the definition of steady, good job, calm voice, the kind of man who never raised it because he never had to. Carol had been warm then, too, pressing homemade food into my hands, telling me how lucky Mark was to have found someone so agreeable. I thought that was a compliment. It took me years to realize it was a strategy. After we married, money conversations shifted without me noticing when exactly it happened. Carol handled investments. Mark handled logistics. I handled the house and later our son Noah. Whenever paperwork came up, it was always framed as routine. Just sign here. This is standard. Everyone does it this way. The first time I hesitated, Carol laughed softly and said, sweetheart, you trust your family, don't you? I did. Or at least, I thought I did. Standing on the sidewalk outside the bank now, the official's words replayed in my head. Personally liable. The system says you controlled it. My name tied to money that was gone. I remembered the afternoon Carol had driven me there herself, insisting it was easier if she explained things. She'd talked the entire time, quick and confident, while the banker slid forms across the desk. I remembered how she'd angled them toward me, finger tapping the signature line, voice light. This just lets me help manage things. You're still protected. She called it a protective family trust, said it was about stability, about making sure Noah would always be taken care of. I signed because I didn't want to look suspicious. Because I didn't want to be difficult. Because I thought control and care were the same thing. Back then, the amounts had been smaller. 50,000 here. 30 there. Rebalancing, Carol called it. Long-term planning. Mark would smile and tell me she'd done this her whole life, that she knew what she was doing. And I wanted to believe him. Because believing was easier than asking questions I wasn't sure I was allowed to ask. As I drove home, the numbers kept looping in my head, not just the amount but the timing. An audit doesn't happen by accident. It happens because someone pulls a thread. I parked in the driveway and sat there longer than necessary, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. Through the front window, I could see Carol's car already there. Of course it was. She had a key. She always had a reason to stop by. Inside, she was at the kitchen counter when I walked in, smiling like nothing in the world had shifted. You're back early, she said. Everything okay at the bank? Her timing was perfect. Too perfect. I set my bag down and met her eyes. They had some questions, I said evenly. About the trust. Her smile didn't disappear, but it stayed a second longer than it needed to. Oh, that, she replied. Just boring bank stuff. You know how they get. I nodded, the same way I always had, and poured myself a glass of water. My hand didn't shake. That surprised me. As Carol talked about Noah's school and Mark's schedule, I listened differently than I ever had before. I heard the way she framed decisions as favors, control as protection. I saw the pattern I'd missed because it had been built slowly, one signature at a time. Later that night, after everyone was asleep, I took the copy of the document the bank official had quietly slipped into my purse and laid it out on the table. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I read every line. For the first time, I understood exactly how my life had been arranged without my consent. And as I traced my own name at the bottom of the page, I realized something else, just as clearly. That call didn't end my marriage yet. It ended my silence. I didn't know how it would unfold, not fully, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wouldn't be signing anything ever again. I didn't confront anyone that night. I didn't ask questions. I didn't raise my voice or search for reassurance. I put the papers back into the envelope exactly the way they had been handed to me and placed them inside the kitchen drawer beneath the unpaid mail. Carol watched me do it from the counter, her posture relaxed, her smile gentle, like this was all routine. She asked if the meeting went well. I said yes, because technically it had. The system had finally spoken clearly. Later, when the house went quiet, I sat at the dining table with only the lamp on and read every page again, slower this time, not searching for answers but patterns. The trust wasn't revocable. It wasn't protective. It was discretionary, structured in my name, reported under my social, but managed entirely by an authorized advisor I had never chosen. Carol's handwriting appeared on more than one section, neat and confident. My signature appeared once, shaky, dated 2 years earlier, on a page titled Consent of Beneficiary. I remembered signing it. I remembered her voice that day, soft and precise, explaining it like a formality, something to help with taxes, something families like ours did all the time. I remembered thinking it sounded smart. What I didn't remember was being told it made me legally visible while rendering me financially blind. The audit request timestamped that morning confirmed it. Internal compliance review. Triggered automatically. I wasn't under investigation yet, but my name was now active in a system that didn't care about intention, only control. Around midnight, my phone vibrated. Daniel texted that his mother was worried about me, that stress wasn't good for my condition, that we could talk tomorrow. I stared at the message longer than necessary, noticing how concern had become coordination. In the days that followed, nothing exploded. That was the most unsettling part. Life continued with its familiar rhythms. Carol cooked. Daniel went to work. Our son practiced spelling words at the kitchen table. But something subtle shifted. Carol began mentioning numbers casually, bills she'd handled, accounts she'd adjusted. Daniel deferred to her without realizing it, asking her questions about things that were supposed to be ours. I started noticing how often my name was used when decisions were made without me. "You're listed," Carol would say, as if that meant involved. At night, I logged into every account I could access. Most were view-only. I called the bank from the card in the folder, asking neutral questions, careful not to sound alarmed. The woman on the line confirmed the structure without judgment. She used words like liability, exposure, reporting threshold. She didn't say Carol's name, but she didn't need to. By the end of the week, I understood one thing clearly. This wasn't about money. It was about authorship. Someone had written my role into a system where responsibility was loud and authority was silent. The realization didn't make me angry. It made me careful. I started documenting everything, quietly, methodically. Dates. Emails. Small inconsistencies. I requested copies of agreements I was entitled to, framing it as organization, not suspicion. Carol approved them with a smile that lingered just a second too long. Daniel remained charming, dismissive in that affectionate way that makes doubt feel unreasonable. He told me I was overthinking things, that his mother had experience, that families worked better when roles were clear. I nodded, because clarity was exactly what I was working toward. One afternoon, while Carol was out, I found a folder in the home office labeled simply Trust. Inside were notes I hadn't seen before, handwritten reminders, timelines, even a projected liability estimate written in red ink. $342,000 circled, underlined twice. The number looked different on paper, more deliberate. This hadn't been an accident. That night, after everyone went to sleep, I opened a new document on my laptop and titled it Nothing at All. I didn't know how long this would take or what it would cost me emotionally, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wouldn't be signing anything ever again. Whatever came next, I would be present for it. The door clicked softly behind me, the faint lock sound echoing like a heartbeat in the quiet office. The blinds were drawn halfway, letting in just enough light to make the shadows sharp on the lawyer's polished mahogany desk. His hands trembled slightly as he set a thick folder down, face turned from the screen as though even the thought of its contents was unsettling. "Miss Harper," he said, voice low and deliberate, "if this stands uncontested, you could be personally liable for $342,000 that the system says you controlled." His words weren't just numbers. They were an invisible hand tightening around every aspect of my life, my marriage, my finances, my identity. I didn't flinch. I noticed everything before I understood anything. My pulse stayed even, but something inside me went cold. The lawyer didn't promise victory. He didn't reassure. He simply laid the system bare, exposing the invisible dangers my mother-in-law had threaded into my life through her control of Daniel and the household finances. The folder sat there, closed but heavy with implications. I traced the edge of the polished wood desk, feeling the energy of anticipation that only comes when control shifts quietly from one party to another. Every line of this office, every shadow in the blinds, felt like part of a slow, inevitable orchestration. I remembered how subtly it all began. Carol Reynolds, my mother-in-law, had never shouted, never demanded with a loud voice. She smiled, sweet and approving, yet her words carried invisible weight. "You're on track," she would say in passing, or "I thought that was a compliment," as if strategy was disguised as kindness. Her smile lingered a second too long in the kitchen that morning, and I had noted it without comment. Daniel, my husband, seemed oblivious to her quiet dominion. He nodded, distracted in meetings he didn't fully attend, leaving decisions dangling like threads in the web Carol had spun. But he wasn't a villain. He was the perfect pawn, unaware that every system he believed he controlled was a cage I was slowly learning to navigate. The folder opened under my careful gaze. A discretionary trust, labeled protective but structured in my name, and yet never truly under my control. Audit trails, compliance memos, and bank authorizations whispered of concealed liability, potential retroactive exposure, and legal traps that could undo months of careful maneuvering if mismanaged. Emails drafted but unsent, timestamped and stored, lined the digital trail. A bank call placed earlier that morning confirmed awareness, yet revealed nothing. I was silent, observing the unfolding micro-twists, Carol speaking on my behalf in a meeting she never attended, Daniel distracted by advice from an external consultant, and subtle red flags that suggested compliance officers were quietly noticing discrepancies. Not from fear, but from calculation, I considered each domino. Every hesitation could become leverage, every misstep a potential key to unraveling the control Carol thought permanent. I knew enough to move forward, not enough to relax. One mistake here would expose everything. I glanced at the folder again. The signature line wasn't mine. Not enough to void the document, but enough to raise questions later. I made a note silently, filing it in my mind along with the memory of Daniel asking questions that hinted at trust in me he didn't fully extend. The system, I realized, was a chessboard, and I had just started seeing the hidden edges. The lawyer, noticing my stillness, added, "Most people would panic. Most people sign without reading. That's how control persists." I let that sit. I had never been most people. Outside the window, the hum of traffic felt distant, as if the world was unaware of the quiet war being mapped inside this office. Carol's control extended far beyond the kitchen smiles or casual comments. It was in every ledger, every account, every silent decision that touched my life. I pulled the folder toward me, tracing the memo lines. There were references to beneficiary exposure thresholds, waivers that my signature might unknowingly activate, and a notation of a scheduled internal audit that no one had expected me to notice. Each technical term was a thread I could follow to unravel the control she thought absolute. A text pinged on my phone, Rachel, my friend and subtle emotional mirror, asking if I was okay. I didn't reply. Not yet. Every message, every email, every call had to align perfectly in this chain. Small moves, not dramatic eruptions, defined the pace of strategy. Carol's presence was felt even in absence. I remembered a kitchen scene weeks prior, her comment about being grateful for family loyalty, her smile just lingering a fraction too long. It had felt harmless then, but now I understood. Every word was a breadcrumb in a carefully laid path, leading to control without confrontation. I traced back the micro-twists from the past month, the misfiled insurance forms, the discretionary trust labeled protective but controlled by her advisors, the silent nudges and conversations with Daniel, and the banking notes that quietly confirmed my understanding without alerting Carol. Each minor irregularity, previously invisible, now mapped into a precise strategy. The folder closed with a soft click, echoing like a heartbeat. I leaned back and breathed slowly, maintaining the calm that had defined me throughout this ordeal. Preparation was my weapon. Silent, deliberate, and strategic. I drafted an email to compliance, leaving it unsent but timestamped for tomorrow morning. A call to the bank, merely confirming receipt of prior instructions, hinted at awareness without disclosure. Each action was deliberate, each inaction deliberate. Momentum built quietly in the shadows of observation. Daniel arrived in the office, unaware of the quiet storm swirling around him. I smiled softly, noting his distracted attention to Carol's earlier messages, the subtle influence he unknowingly absorbed. He remained unaware that I was already positioning each micro-detail for later exposure, the slow unraveling of control that he and his mother believed permanent. Carol's influence was everywhere, yet I had begun the silent dismantling. Micro-twists, chain reactions, legal leverage, and emotional positioning were all in place. I moved like a shadow through the web she had spun, careful not to alert the spider until the trap was fully set. I paused to review the folder one final time. Notes, memos, timestamps, bank confirmations, micro-inefficiencies, each was a potential lever, each was a whisper of the system horror waiting to shift. The calm in my chest belied the controlled storm inside. I knew the next moves would define the turning point. And as I stood, sliding the folder into my bag, one thought anchored my resolve. This wasn't revenge. It was preparation. Every document, every micro-twist, every quiet observation was a step in the strategy that would reclaim control, not with spectacle, but with inevitable precision. I walked toward the door, ready to re-enter the world where every smile, every phrase, every ledger, every text could now be seen with new eyes. The momentum was mine, and Carol's reign, no matter how silent and calculated, was poised on the edge of exposure. I had begun the subtle orchestration that would, over time, dismantle control without drama, without confrontation, with only the quiet authority of patience and intelligence. This was the calm before the storm that, when it arrived, would feel both inevitable and precise. The office smelled faintly of aged paper and coffee. I had arrived early, hours before anyone else, knowing Carol would likely leave her notes scattered across the table. My pulse stayed calm, even though every instinct screamed that today could change everything. The blinds were drawn halfway, cutting the sunlight into precise lines across the polished oak desk. On the surface lay the folder from the previous meeting, labeled in Carol's meticulous handwriting, Family Trust Review. I noticed the corner of the paper slightly bent, just enough to suggest someone had been here without putting it back properly. Every tiny misstep mattered, and I cataloged them silently. My hands rested on the desk, not touching anything, but my eyes traced each mark as though mapping a battlefield. It wasn't about rushing. It was about waiting, calculating, understanding the moves before they were even made. From the corner of the room, my phone buzzed quietly. A message from the bank confirming receipt of my previous inquiry. I didn't read it immediately. Instead, I allowed the subtle tension to settle in, the way chess masters feel before the first forced move. Every call, every file, every acknowledgement became a thread weaving a quiet net of accountability. Carol believed control was effortless, that the rules bent under her charm and authority. She hadn't realized that control could be mirrored with patience and observation. At precisely 10 a.m., the door creaked open and the lawyer entered. His steps were deliberate, his eyes briefly scanning my calm posture before lowering to the folder on the desk. His hands trembled just slightly as he set it down, and I noted the small shift in his stance, a hesitation, a ripple of unease. "You understand the implications if this continues unchallenged," he said softly, voice low, almost reverent, as though speaking of a miscalculated storm waiting to break. He didn't promise a victory, he only framed the reality. The system doesn't wait for morality. The system doesn't excuse silence. I nodded, keeping my expression even, letting the weight of his words settle into the room like a quiet fog. I understand, I replied. Not from fear, but from strategy. I understand enough to move forward, not enough to relax. The tiny anchor of doubt was deliberate. Tension was essential for the next steps. Micro-twists began to unfold in subtle succession. A file left slightly askew. A time-stamped email from an advisor I had never contacted directly appeared in the CC line of a compliance report. The bank call earlier now took on new meaning, small acknowledgments, faint confirmations, ripples that Carol had not predicted. She believed in her meticulous planning. I believed in the inevitability of overlooked patterns. Every unnoticed move became leverage. Carol appeared in the background via video call. Her smile was perfectly practiced, approving, as she commented on matters she hadn't actually reviewed. Daniel, distracted by another task, nodded absent-mindedly, unaware of the silent corrections being catalogued against him. In that moment, I allowed myself a brief observation. The arrogance of control is the most fragile foundation. I pulled out the discretionary trust papers, a family trust she had described as protective, but never under my control. Each clause became a whisper in my mind: retroactive liabilities, reporting thresholds, beneficiary exposure. I traced my fingers along the printed lines without touching the ink, memorizing each stipulation, each caveat. The legal language felt like a secret code I alone could decipher, a map of vulnerabilities waiting to be navigated. A new micro-twist emerged, a text from Daniel at a perfect moment, asking a question that revealed his unawareness of recent filings. Carol's influence showed cracks, subtle but undeniable. I archived everything quietly, time-stamped screenshots, email headers, ledger notes, every piece a silent footstep toward accountability. Hours passed. The office lights dimmed slightly with the approaching evening, and my calm posture remained unchanged. It was not patience born of indecision, but patience as a weapon. I had mapped out the likely sequence of events, anticipated responses, and yet I kept room for error. One small mistake, and the chain of leverage could break. Not from fear, but from calculation, I whispered to myself, echoing the rhythm of earlier preparation. By late afternoon, the lawyer left, leaving the folder closed and face down, as it had arrived that morning. Momentum had shifted subtly but irrevocably. I felt the quiet thrill of control without confrontation. The power didn't roar, it unfolded. The bank was aware, compliance lines were acknowledged, and Carol remained convinced her influence was unshakable. I packed the folder into my briefcase carefully, noting the alignment of sunlight and shadows on the desk. The room, once a stage for silent dominance, now bore witness to the beginning of accountability. Each file, each acknowledgement, each micro-twist, they were building a narrative that Carol had no way to interrupt. Stepping out into the late afternoon sun, I felt a rare sense of momentum. Not triumph, not relief, but clarity. The network of control had begun to unravel quietly, and I was the calm observer orchestrating the unfolding sequence. This wasn't vengeance yet. It was preparation, strategy, and inevitability, and for the first time, I allowed myself the thought that the next move could come from me. The morning was quiet, deceptively so. The kind of silence that presses on your ears, reminding you that decisions made in private echo louder than any public drama. I sat at the oak desk, the folder I'd carried for weeks now open before me, a soft golden light spilling across its papers. Each document, time-stamped, notarized, cross-checked, told a story that Carol Reynolds had hoped I'd never read. I let my fingers hover above the signature lines. I didn't rush. This wasn't haste, this was precision. A faint ping on my laptop drew my attention. Daniel's name flashed in the corner, a casual text. Carol wants to review the quarterly files. Did you send them? I didn't respond. Not yet. I had learned the power of patience. Every message, every micro-move would be accounted for. I leaned back, inhaled slowly, and reminded myself, this was no personal vendetta. It was a calculated collapse. The system would do the work. I only needed to guide it. My mind rewound to the countless evenings spent noting patterns. The subtle approvals Carol had given me over months, each compliment carrying a hidden expectation. The family dinners where Daniel's attention had wandered, his eyes always seeking his mother's subtle nods. Every smile, every word, every strategically placed comment had been catalogued. I had watched silently, collected quietly, and waited for the precise moment when leverage would outweigh fear. That moment arrived the instant the call came. The same bank that had frozen accounts temporarily weeks ago now confirmed a new audit, triggered by my carefully timed submissions. The voice on the line, calm, professional, yet firm, rattled Daniel more than any argument could. Ms. Harper, your accounts, including discretionary trust allocations, are under full review. Any discrepancies flagged now will initiate automatic liability disclosures. Daniel froze. Carol's smile faltered on the video call. I noticed the micro-tremor in her hand as she adjusted the headset, realizing her usual control was slipping. And yet I remained silent. My pulse steady. The world outside the window could have been a storm. Inside, I was the eye of it. I methodically organized the papers for the settlement. Legal waivers signed by Carol in moments of overconfidence, bank communications confirming awareness of unusual transactions, time-stamped emails that no one could dispute. My role had been passive until now, but this was the pivot. Each piece of evidence aligned like dominoes, ready to fall with inevitability. Daniel's attempt to intervene was almost laughable. He called, texted, and even tried to pull an advisor into the mix. But the chain of micro-twists I had built over months had insulated me. One misstep on their part, and the system would expose them. I had learned to use bureaucracy as my ally. Compliance reports, liability clauses, and trustee acknowledgments, each was a tool in the quiet dismantling of their control. Carol's face on the call betrayed a rare human emotion, panic. The rehearsed calm was gone. She tried to speak, but her words stumbled over one another, trapped by the procedures I had anticipated. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to threaten. The system, meticulous and blind, did it for me. For the first time, Daniel looked at me not as a wife, not as a daughter-in-law, but as a strategist. The subtle fear in his eyes mirrored the countless calculations I had made silently in the dark, late into the night. She's been preparing this all along, he must have realized, and indeed, he wasn't wrong. The final documents were submitted with a click. Emails sent, copies stored securely, bank notifications logged. My role concluded with meticulous calm, a soft exhale, a measured sip of coffee, a glance at the framed photo of Daniel and me from happier days. This wasn't revenge in the explosive, dramatic sense, it was restoration. The power imbalance had shifted, quietly and irrevocably. Carol called one last time, her voice tight, professional yet fragile. I assumed you'd. I interrupted gently, calmly, my words deliberate. Assumptions are dangerous. Documentation doesn't lie. Daniel remained silent in the background, realizing the collapse was not personal, it was procedural. I had played the long game, and now the system enforced it. The accounts were stabilized, the trust allocations corrected, and my family, our life, safeguarded. Not with vengeance, not with loud confrontation, but with patience, intelligence, and methodical execution. I closed the folder, the golden light now softer as the sun dipped behind the skyline. My heart did not race. My mind was clear. I whispered to no one in particular. I'm not rich. I'm free. And in that quiet freedom, I found dignity, peace, and the certainty that the next chapter would be ours to write, unbound by control, manipulation, or fear. The system had delivered justice, and I had only needed to remain calm, observant, and strategic, exactly as the diamond prompt had guided.